All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the last few lessons, we were speaking about khiyar. And we said khiyar is where a person has an option or a choice to carry on with the transaction or to what they call fasakh. It means to cancel or annul the transaction. Inshallah, today we're moving on to a new subchapter, and that's to do with transactions which are not permissible or which are fasid or batil. And now you've got to remember in the other madhahib, the word batil is the same as fasid, which means to be void or to be nullified. Mostly in the other madhahib, they are both the same. And then you've got in the Hanafi madhab, they differentiate slightly between what's batil and fasid. Here, when we speak about transactions, we speak about business, they tell you that batil is the higher of the two evils in the sense that the transaction is completely void. Any exchange that occurred in terms of goods or currency or medium of exchange, that is completely impermissible. As for fasid, okay, they tell you that there's certain things in it which are not permissible. However, if the transaction had to occur and there was what they call qabd. Qabd is somebody, of one of the two parties, both parties, they got hold of whatever they're transacting with. Then here we'll say the transaction is correct, meaning that it doesn't have to change hands. Whereas here, the transaction is void. It's like it didn't happen in the first place. Here we'll say that change of ownership is still correct. And they give you an example, not to go too deep and too complicated, but one of the examples they give you is if people are transacting with either the medium of exchange or the product being haram or both of them. So let's say, for example, the product being haram, okay? And an example of a product which would be haram is mayta. Mayta is a dead animal, okay? So here they tell you that this transaction is batil, completely void. Whereas if a person is transacting with, and before that, why do they say it's completely void? Because they say nobody sees Maita as a viable product, meaning a permissible product. And when they say nobody, they're speaking about the Abrahamic religions. Okay, that's mentioned before. And as for fasid, they give you the example of wine, khamr. Here they'll tell you that it's not allowed to sell, but if somebody had to sell and there was change of ownership, here we'll say that this khamr, some people, i.e., the non Muslims, they count it as a permissible product. Hence, if it changed hands here, we'll say the transaction is done. So notice how we're differentiating between two things here. We're differentiating between a transaction. Is it void or does it still stand? And the second thing is to do with the sin. Okay? To do with the sin. Is the person sinful here? Is the person sinful here? So sometimes you'll find masail where they speaking about do worldly rulings apply? They're not speaking about the sin or the good deed, etc. I'll give you another example of this, not related to Buyoo. If somebody had to steal a house or they had to steal water, somebody had to steal water and they had to make wudu. Now we all agree that the theft of this water is a sin. It's not allowed, okay? You're not allowed to steal. However, if they then use that stolen water to make wudu, do we say that the wudu is also void because the water was stolen? Or do we say the wudu is is valid. However, he'll be sinful for having stolen. So, do we differentiate or not? The majority opinion is that wherever you're able to divide and look at them separately, you look at them separately. So, this is the sin of it, the theft. However, he used the water to make wudu, so we say his wudu is still valid, and that would mean his salah is still valid. So, that's a similar concept. And you'll find it when you go through the Hanafi books, difference between fasid and batil. Thereafter, they start giving you some examples of transactions which are fasid. Okay, here we could say impermissible transactions, transactions which are void, etc. Number one, they tell you, I gave you the example already, if either the medium of exchange or the product or both of them are impermissible. You're not allowed to deal in them. And we spoke about pig, for example, wine, for example, etc. Here we'll tell you that this transaction is impermissible and not allowed. Number two is if somebody sells something which they don't own. Okay. So I give you an example, or they give an example. They say that you cannot sell a fish in water or a bird flying in the air. Why? Because it's not under your ownership. And because it's not under your ownership, you will be, or most likely will be, unable to deliver the product. So, how did you take that person's wealth and sold them a bird that you don't even have in your possession? Okay. And similar to this, when it comes to selling things which you don't own, okay, or you have no ownership over. You sell somebody else's house, you sell your neighbor's house. The house is worth 500,000 and you sell it for 50,000 and you took money from somebody. And this person comes and says, you know what, the house is mine. He transacted on my behalf. Here we'll say that this person in the first place, that transaction doesn't stand because they sold that which they don't own. Okay. And that's the rule. And anything which is similar will take its ruling. So if you start selling things online that you don't own, then here we'll tell you it's void. One contemporary masala that will come up is drop shipping. Are you allowed to drop ship or not? Basically, drop shipping means you set up your website, okay? You don't own any stock or anything. This is your website. You have suppliers in a part of the world where these goods are cheap. And you, let's say here they are selling their goods for $10, and you selling on your website their goods for $50. You don't own, you pocket the difference. Here we'll tell you that if it's a generic product, okay, if it's a generic product, and let's say you're unable to get from this factory, you can get from someone else and someone else and someone else, then it will be permissible. However, if it's a specific product belonging to somebody, here we'll tell you you're not allowed to do it because there's the possibility that you're not going to be able to deliver the goods. Okay. Thereafter, moving on, give you an example of any large unknown, what they call gharar. Okay. And some of the examples they give you is it's impermissible to sell an animal while it's still in the mother's womb. So, for example, those who buy livestock, cows, horses, sheep, etc. It's impermissible for somebody to buy this animal before it's born. Why? Because you may pay the money and the animal may come out dead, or it may come out with a defect, etc. So here the Messenger ﷺ naha an bay'i habalil qabala. Why? Because of the large unknown. Okay. Thereafter, some of the transactions of the people of Jahiliyyah, which included uh, what they call Bay'ul Mulamasa. Okay. Mulamasa is from the word lams, to touch. or munabadha, which means to throw at somebody. So in those days, if you had a buyer and a seller, and they used to be debating or negotiating, then they had a norm amongst themselves that, you know what, if the seller threw this piece of material onto you, it became compulsory for you to buy it. Or if you were not sure and you took a stone and you just had to guess and you threw, and whichever product the stone touched, you would have to buy. All that is impermissible. Okay. And anything in our times which would be similar. So, for example, let's say on the internet, if you've got that spinning wheel and a person is having a competition to say that press the wheel and whatever it lands on, let's say they got different products on that wheel, whatever it lands on, you're forced to buy. Here we'll say that that is similar to the transactions of Jahiliyyah. If you had to look at it, these prohibited transactions as well as other prohibited transactions, you find that it comes down to a few reasons. Those reasons we could put them into four main groups. Number one, and its detail will come, is if there's any interest riba involved in the deal. Okay, interest. Number two is if there's any oppression or dhulm involved in the deal. Number three is if there's any jahala, great unknown involved in the deal. And number four is if there's any gharar involved in the deal. Omar, I think you moved our board as you were moving. Right, here we are. So any interest, any oppression, and all this will come. So anything you find that's prohibited, it generally falls into one of these four buckets. Interest, oppression, a great unknown, or the possibility of winning big or losing big, gharar. And that's why gambling, for example, would be impermissible, because possibility of you winning big or losing big. So inshallah for fiqh, we'll stop there. If you got any questions, you can ask at the end. Thereafter, inshallah, we starting off with new book. Of introduction quickly. We've been taking fiqh so far, okay? What we've been taking are mainly just masail, rulings. I come, I tell you, okay, this is permissible, this is not permissible. Sometimes I give you a piece of evidence, etc. A lot of these pieces of evidence or a lot of these rulings, the evidence is derived either from the Quran or the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when you look through the Quran and the hadith, you find that there's ayat as well as hadith speaking about different topics. Okay. Some of them speaking about stories of the Anbiya, Allah is speaking about Himself, etc. Then there are those which are speaking about fiqhi rulings. Generally, they're called ahkam. Okay, ahkam, the plural of hukum, which means a ruling. So if you're taking the verses of the Quran which are speaking about fiqhi rulings, it's called ayatul ahkam, verses that are speaking about rulings. And if you're speaking about hadith, which have religious rulings, you're speaking about ahadithul ahkam. Okay. So, in order to make it easy for those who learn fiqh, you find that obviously it's encouraged for a person to memorize the Quran as well as memorize as much of the Sunnah as they can and understand and practice upon it. However, to make it easy for those who study fiqh, especially, some of the scholars have taken out these ayat that speak about ahkam fiqh. Some say they're roughly about 500 odd, as well as ahadith which speak about ahkam. Okay, a lot of the times you'll find in the Quran that the rulings mentioned, some which go into a lot of depth and others which are just mentioned briefly. So salah, uh, it doesn't give you all the detail of salah that we find in the sunnah. So that would come under ahadithul ahkam. Okay. In order to make it easy for the people to memorize, you find scholars started to write books gathering these ahadith al-ahkam, especially because most of the detail of fiqh is found here. And then people derived and they took principles and rules, etc. One of these scholars was Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. He is the one who has the famous explanation of Sahih al-Bukhari. Okay, the book Bukhari, he has a famous explanation called Fathul Bari. Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, lived roughly between 700, I think 751, around there. He was born Hijri, and he passed away. He was born a bit later than that. He passed away in 800 and say 50, 852, I think. So he must have lived by about 771, maybe, roughly in this era. He definitely died in 852. Now, he had come after, or 800, roughly 700 years after the Messenger ﷺ. He had benefited from the scholars of the past. He had benefited from those who gathered tafsir and hadith and ahkam, etc. He was a great scholar of Islam. His madhab was Shafi'i. So in fiqh, he was a Shafi'i. However, it didn't prevent him from understanding the other madhahib and going in detail and debating, etc. Okay, so that's Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, rahimahullah. So he put together these ahadith that speak about fiqhi rulings according to their abwab, according to their chapters. So he started off with tahara, then salah, then zakah. Because he's Shafi'i, he mentions a lot of the pieces of evidence with regards to the Shafi'i madhab, and he also mentions with regards to the other madhab. So in his introduction, which we'll take today, the intro, there's a few important points he mentions. Then we'll move on to Kitab al-Tahara on Friday, inshallah. Firstly, he praises Allah at the beginning, okay? And he, in his introduction, after praising Allah and sending peace and salutations upon Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he then says why he wrote this book. His book is called Bulugh Maraam, which literally means attaining the goal. What's the goal? The goal is to be able to have these pieces of evidence in fiqh from the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu. He says, this is a short booklet, فهذا مختصر في الفقه, speaking about fiqh. He says فهذا مختصر في الفقه, and then he starts talking about some of his terminology that he uses. فهذا يشتمل على أصول الأدلة الحديثية. He says that in this book you'll find the main principles that are found in the hadith. Okay, speaking about the subject of fiqh, so ahadithul ahkam. And he tells you some of the terminology that he uses. Okay, he tells you that I'm mainly going to be sticking to those to 7 books of hadith. Now, important to mention before you even get that far is during the time of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there were people who memorized his hadith. Okay, Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they were those who collected a hadith. Then as time passed, you found that there were those who came and added that which may not have been hadith, or that which was slightly weak, or that which was okay. So there came a time where the ulama had to differentiate between what was authentic and not so authentic, and weak and lied upon. So you find that Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim, for example, when they came, they chose in their books that whatever hadith they collect, we are going to use or we are going to make a condition for our collection, as-sihha. Okay? As-sihha means for the hadith to be authentic. Now you must remember, in those days they were allowed to speak about rulings from the people of the book, things which may have not been that authentic, as long as you mentioned your chain of narrators, because people were qualified enough to know that this is authentic, this is not authentic, this is just a fairy tale, however we're allowed to mention it, etc. Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim came and they said, you know what, whatever we are going to collect will be authentic. And they had very stringent rules. Bukhari, rahimahullah, his rules were much stronger or much higher. They were of the highest. So that's why when it comes to the grading, we find that whatever Bukhari and Muslim agreed upon, that's why if you read muttafaqun alayhi or agreed upon, if you see it in a book, means Bukhari and Muslim agreed upon this. This hadith is authentic. After that, the next level of authenticity is what Bukhari has recorded only, and then what Muslim has recorded only. This in terms of authenticity. After that, you got Ashab sunan. So you got Imam Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, An-Nasa'i, Ibn Majah. Those four didn't make authenticity a condition when it comes to their books. However, they avoided that which was completely fabricated. Or if they mention something which was weak, sometimes they themselves in the book they'll tell you that, and it's weak. Okay. However, after Bukhari and Muslim, the famous books of hadith are these four, known as Ashab sunan. You got Abu Dawood, then At-Tirmidhi, then An-Nasa'i, then Ibn Majah. So generally people, when they quoting hadith, they quoting mostly from one of these six books. Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Majah. You've got scholars like Imam Malik, for example, in his Muwatta, and he wrote different chapters. Also, Imam Malik had his own book, or his own madhab, sorry, in fiqh. People still benefit from it, no doubt. Imam Ahmad, people still benefit from his musnad, is very big, no doubt. However, these six still remain the most famous. Then, if you had to go further than these six, you'll find people they quote from. If it's not found there, they'll quote from Muwatta Malik, Musnad Ahmad, and sometimes Ad-Darimi, etc. But mainly, if you know these. So Ibn Hajar went through all these books. And remember, in Bukhari, he's got a hadith which he repeats. So he's got 6,000 odd hadith. Muslim, roughly the same. So all these so many hadith, and he chose for you roughly 1,300 of the most encompassing hadith, speaking about fiqh, subject of fiqh from all these books. And at the end of each hadith, he mentions the ruling of the hadith. He says that, is it authentic? Is it not authentic? Is it good, not good, etc.? Who said it's sahih? Who said it's not, etc.? So he mentions to you his terminology. He says, if I say that the seven have recorded it, he says, I'm talking about these seven: Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Majah, and Ahmad. Okay? So that's one of his terminologies. He says, Rawahu Sab'ah. Seven have recorded it. He's talking about them. Then he says that if I say that six people have recorded this hadith, I'm talking about these first six: Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Majah. He says, if I say five have recorded it, he says, I'm speaking about the five at the bottom. So Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Majah, and Ahmad. Okay? He says, and if I say that four have recorded it, I'm talking about these four. And he carries on mentioning, and then he says, if I mention that it's agreed upon or that two have recorded it, you've got Bukhari and Muslim. So he mentions some of his terminology at the beginning. What's important for you to know is generally what's recorded by Bukhari and Muslim is the highest form of sihha or authenticity. After that is Bukhari, after that is Muslim, after that we go to Ashab sunan, etc. So he mentions for you this, he mentions the takhrij with you, and then he says, وقد حررته تحريرا بالغا ليصير من يحفظه به أقرانه نابغا. He says that بين أقرانه نابغا. He says that I've made this book such that I've chosen the most or the best and most encompassing of these ahadith, so the person who memorizes it and knows it will be ahead of his peers when it comes to fiqh. So imagine, you know the piece of evidence, you know where the Messenger ﷺ said it, you know that if somebody told you a hadith that's not authentic, you say this is not authentic because of X, Y, and Z, etc. And this is a science on its own. So he put these 1,300 odd hadith, encouraging the people to actually memorize. So the least we could do is go through them. And for those who can memorize, I would encourage you to memorize. And you have already a background. So we've taken Kitab al-Tahara in Masail form where we took the rulings. Now we're going a step higher, which is a bit more evidence based. Then after that, people go a step higher where is contemporary fiqh, so between the madhahib, the debates, etc. And you carry on ascending until you get to contemporary masail. Inshallah, we'll stop there. In the next lesson, in Bulugh al-Maraam, we'll take the first 3 hadith that he is speaking about. He mentions this hadith of the Messenger Sallallahu. It doesn't only mean that if he mentions a hadith that it's only to do with one ruling. No, there's thousands of rulings that can be derived from all these ahadith. And it's not only to do with fiqh. The main story may be to do with fiqh. However, there's so many others where we can